time.
And I noticed how I remember how you said that I wasn't here, and I'm more than sure who you got together with, but you were saying how you got together with a group of people, and you know how I think it's the time when the tsunami and all the heat, and you guys talked about balancing the seasons because a lot of people were getting killed, a lot of people complaining about the heat, and you want to balance the season. I mean, straighten things out.
Okay,
And,
I know where you're going.
okay.
You're talking about when we came together last year.
Okay.
The teachers came together last year.
Okay.
And it was not based upon somebody getting killed in the tsunami at all.
Okay.
It was not based upon a heat wave. What it was based upon was balance, period.
Right. I just thought it was around that time.
But, no, it was last year.
Yeah. Okay.
No, we year before last now, 2012.
Yeah. Well. Okay. That's what I was feeling the whole time. Me and Brian and my mom was having that same talk. Mel was having that same talk. I was like, this is what it's supposed to be. I was saying the exact same thing to them because that's what I believe. This is how everything's supposed to be. We've been wishy-washy the whole time.
And we still are.
And we don't know how to accept it.
Well, we still are. You know, it's easy to sit here and talk about it,
Mm-hmm.
but it's difficult to live it. And even sitting here talking about it, it's difficult to let go of your intellect and be as a child.
Right.
You know, it's easy to say it, but it's difficult to participate. It's very difficult. And for those who think that the disciples did it or the prophets did it, they didn't. They struggled also. If they had not been struggling, they wouldn't have stayed in the upper room until they got chased out. And if Jonah had followed instructions from the beginning, he would not have been cast overboard. So the struggle has always been there between what we are accustomed to and what should be. And a lot of the reason the struggle is there is because it takes too much time to explore yourself and begin to understand how things are supposed to be, as opposed to how we say they are supposed to be. We are so caught up into the concept of doctrine, or philosophical doctrine, I should say, until we have lost the affinity for the simplicity of it all. Because it is really, really simple. But it's so simple until we don't believe that it can be like that because it's not complicated enough. We got to figure stuff out. It got to happen the way we want it to happen, or it has to be step one, step two, as opposed to rock it back and let it be. That's what kids do. Just sit back and let it be. You talk about it, and if you don't understand it, so what? It's like when you ask, when you talk about seeking the kingdom, or the kingdom coming, or anything along those lines, or your will be done. All we're talking about is following the counsel of the Creator. But we are too busy to do that. The radio's on in the car, the TV on in the home. We got to balance our checkbook. We got to Skype. We got to do all these 9,000 different things, and we make excuses not to do it. And then when things go awry, we want to pray, but guess what? We don't even know how to do that either. Because if you look at it very closely, the idea of praying has nothing to do with words. Jesus clearly said that the heathen prays on the street corners, but you will not get answers based on the words. But then he goes on to talk about the internal essence of prayer itself. And And when we begin to search inside and we find balance and peace in ourselves, that's when balance and peace comes to the natural world. Because again, creation is mourning, waiting for the redemption of the human. Questions? Did I answer your questions, Jimmy?
So, when we bring balance to our own thoughts and our own intentions, then we bring balance to the world, which is waiting for it. So, I think I should go back before when I was talking about paradox. I won't leave you hanging, I'm sorry. But part of that, I'll tie it into what we just talked about. Bringing balance in ourselves and in our environment, which is an extension of ourselves. Part of the reason it's difficult to do that is because our experience is somewhat paradoxical. In other words, we meet with situations that we have to overcome that feel like they cannot be. They feel mutually exclusive, even though they're not. So, Lao Tzu, however you pronounce his last name, said, all truth is paradoxical because it conflicts with what you perceive to be real. But you don't perceive everything about what is real. You perceive a portion of it. And when something falls outside of that, which you perceive, it conflicts with what you think is real and creates a paradox. So, in order to get over that paradox, you have to expand what you're able to see about that situation, which you perceive to be paradoxical. So in other words, if you meet opposition and you can't get around it, then it's up to you to expand your attitude, your perception, your ability to use that situation as opposed to feeling stuck by it. So one of the things I like to use to illustrate this, has anyone heard of the omnipotence paradox?
No.
Does anyone know that? There's a bunch of variations on it. But basically it goes, wait, has anybody heard that before?
Yeah.
Okay, basically it goes, could an omnipotent being, an all-powerful being, and what the being actually does can change, but for example, could an omnipotent being create a stone so heavy that even it could not lift it? So, does everybody get why that is paradoxical? Could an omnipotent being create a stone so heavy that even it could not lift it? So, if the being is all-powerful, it should be able to do anything. So it should be able to meet the criteria for the paradox. But if it does, it fails to lift the stone, and therefore it's not all-powerful. So how could it be omnipotent? Is why that's a paradox. So,
Nick, the question I'll raise is, what is the stone real? Who determines what the stone is? It's funny you asked that because this morning, or was it last night, I asked Phoebe could the Creator create a heaven that he could live in? if he's larger than anything, can he create a heaven large enough for it to live in? Based upon going to heaven to be with him. And she did the same thing, we know it now. But that, and my conclusion to that was this, that when it talks about the creator of being in everything, and everything is the creator. So the idea of heaven is the soul, it's also the idea of creating, because it is no different than its creation. And why would he need to lift it if you created it?
And yeah, and the other part of that is there are actually there's a range of solutions to that, but they all fall in the same vein. Essentially, go outside right now and find a stone you can't lift. If you can't lift it, then the Creator is all powerful. And it would have to be, because that's who you are and that's who you're connected to. That's true, right? But you can't lift a stone. Why? Because you don't know how. So, you created it, forgot who you were, couldn't lift it, and that initiated the process of you finding out who you were again. So, it's able to be solved if you add another dimension to what you perceive about the situation. And the same goes with all paradoxes. They look like paradoxes until you expand beyond the space within which they exist. So, did that make any sense?
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
Some. Not 100%, okay, it's not 100% clear to me. I mean, you just threw a koan at us,
Yep.
right? What's the sound of a tree falling if nobody hears it? Same difference, in a way. And you're saying the solution, we tend to think of the solution, what do I say, analogously, in a two-dimensional way. But if we were looking at it from a third or fourth dimensional possibility, how would we be quote-unquote seeing it more what? More completely?
Yeah. And but not just intellectually either. Like the solution becomes apparent when you begin to live it. But yeah,
Yeah,
go ahead.
the way I see it is, and I may be wrong, is that your solution was, if you can't lift it, you've forgotten how to. Because the one who is attempting to lift it is actually the Creator. So, the forgetting how to is because we've forgotten what's real. So the reality of it is this. When they cross, if a tree falls in the road, does it, nobody's there, does it make a noise? But somebody's always there. We just forgot where we were. Somebody's always there. And if you look at it from a spiritual perspective, someone is always there. And the someone who's always there is the one who created it. Otherwise, the Creator does not permeate everything that is. And see, the other part of it is this, as you said, it's not an intellectual question. When we deal with it from an intellectual perspective, we are dealing with it only from a human perspective. We're only dealing with it materially and not spiritually. But if we deal with it from a spiritual perspective, it doesn't mean that we are able to do what we can do philosophically, and that is list all the variables involved or every step that it takes to get to that point. When in essence, the scripture simply, the spiritual is simply saying, come to a realization of who you are. And then all the other stuff, you realize that all the other stuff that you've been attempting does not even matter at all.
Yeah. And it's very difficult to come to that conclusion. In fact, you can't intellectually.
No, you can't.
Even though we can describe a way around the problem I just proposed. That can only happen after you have solved it.
But that's the whole trouble with the translation of all of the Holy Books, regardless of which language it was translated from. That's the whole problem, because we are dominated by the English language and the English translation, right? Or the Greek translations, of course. But when we look at it from the perspective of those who wrote it originally, those who wrote it originally was not writing about external world, but an internal world. Shalom is the Aramaic word for prayer. But the whole concept of prayer has nothing to do with words, but we are taught that we're supposed to pray by verbalizing everything, as opposed to being quiet and breathing. That being still and breathing. Be still and know that you're God. And breathing. Knowing who we are has nothing to do with a formula for getting it, or a formula for understanding it. Is a resonation that's more important than a formula that's offered for you to believe who you are. It's like in this world, if you show me, I'll believe it. But in the spiritual, you believe it before you see it.
Yeah. So just to make sure, so any intellectual problem any one of us is faced with, it becomes not a problem at all if you learn how to deal with it with something else than your intellect.
That's the childlike thing.
Yeah.
Children do
Because-
not reason through problems intellectually. For the most part, they deal with it emotionally or internally. And they see things that we don't see. But we get them out of that as they grow older by teaching them how to be concrete as opposed to being fluid in their thinking.
And when you are fluid in your thinking, you can draw upon what's real and who and what you actually are, as opposed to being stuck within something that you created, which is your intellectual understanding of how things work.
Say that again. Nick, say that again.
So I said, when you're fluid with your thinking and your thoughts, you can draw upon what's real about who and what you are and the situation, as opposed to being stuck in what you have created as your own intellectual understanding of how things work.
When we don't do that, then we begin to use the Creator as a crutch and or as a spiritual Santa Claus. We ask for everything, or we tell them what to do, and that's not how it works at all. Balance is what allows everything to flow through you. See, refer to the principles and the advice or the guidance of the Creator, and all these other things will flow through you. So we cannot simply say, well, Janice, you pray for that car, you go get it. Well, the Creator doesn't have cars to get you things. You know, they don't just manifest into being. But the resources are there if she seeks the righteousness, then the resources, she draws the resources to her. It's like whatever you put out there, that's what comes back. And it may not come back in the same form, but it does come back. And it leads me to see that we have to have that continuous, intimate relationship with the spiritual. Otherwise, we are bouncing in and out, and that doesn't work, because the universe or the Creator is not our adversary. It is not battling against us. We are battling against ourselves by virtue of the way we think and how we respond to different circumstances. And what we end up doing, what we have done rather, we have been taught that the Creator is up in heaven and we are down below. When, if that is true, then He's an absentee landlord. If there's separation, He's an absentee landlord. But if we believe that the Creator is everything it created and more, if we believe that the Creator is spirit, then it is impossible for us to accept an idea of an old dude with a white beard sitting on a golden throne with Jesus on his right side, waiting for us to mess up so He can hit us in the head with a mallet. You know, when you look at it the way it really is, that it being spirit, then there was a constant reminder that the Creator exists and that the Creator is in everything, and you exist with the Creator in terms of being one with, because you breathe. And if it is spirit, it's breath, because breath, spirit, air, it doesn't matter. When you feel a gentle breeze or a strong wind, it's the same purpose, the same thing. But they're guided by humanity, because He did say to the Adam, dominate the earth. So the things in this realm are dominated by our thoughts, by our deeds. You know, what gets me is that we've had so many things that people of the ancient world have said exist, and we in the Western world have doubted it, questioned it, and said there's hocus pocus, superstition, bunch of baloney. But then when you take the scientific stuff, equipment, and they prove that what they were saying is true, then it gets swept under the rug. So if it's proven true, and they had no microscope, telescope, etc., if it's proven true, then why is everything else they say wrong? It seems to me that we would be more cautious about how we determine what is or how it functions. When you can look at the people of antiquity and see that they sought answers from inside of themselves and ended up mapping the constellations and mapping the universe, and they had no equipment, and we just now began to see some of the things that they saw. So who's the idiot? You know, who's the one who's uneducated? See, Reverend Hawkins said to me one time, he said, there's a difference between education and an educated fool. An educated man and an educated fool. An educated fool is predictable, but an educated man always seeks for knowledge beyond what he sees, and does not jump to conclusions based upon what someone else says, as opposed to looking for answers himself. And I believe that we, and I'm one of those people, have spent so much time looking at stuff until we got so stuck in it, until it's difficult for us to reach out of it and see who we really are. And you know, I'm not Rene Descartes. I'm not Thomas Hobbes. I'm not Machiavelli. I'm not Paul. I'm not Peter. I'm James Jacob. That's who I am. And that's the earthly person. Now that I can see who the earthly person is, who is this James for real? Who is this spiritual, the spiritual entity and when I think about it, being one with the Father, being one with the Father goes beyond just saying it. If I am one with the Father, then everything that exists in me also, including the universe itself. But we see everything as being, separate from us, and it's not. We are one with everything that is, and that's why Richard made mention of the almanac earlier. That's why men are able to do that. You go back to the ones who wrote the almanac and ask them, how did you figure out all this stuff was going to be? How did you know this? How did it come into being? What's right now? The almanac is more accurate than meteorologists, and always have been. But we accept the meteorologist over the almanac because it does not fit our educational system. And until we step outside the education system and begin to see the world reality, we'll always be stuck. Does that make sense? I mean, think about it. The will of God. He's simply saying, allow the force of your essence to flow through me and with me, that I may be able to reach the goals that you have set for me. That's all it is. Opening yourself up. And I remember when I was writing doctrine, I would simplify what was known as Baptist doctrine. I would write just stuff that we use in the classes in the churches I pastor or in the association itself. And when I look back at that, I see how forceful it was, but I also see how intellectual it was in terms of building a fence around it, and outside of this Baptist doctrine, everything else is wrong. That's how we have built ourselves. People who don't think like we think are wrong, and that's not true. And that time and time again, that has been proven. If you right now, if you go ask, and in this material world, you go ask anyone who discovered America, they're going to say Columbus. Whoever wins the war, that's who writes the story, the history. You ask anyone, what did Columbus do? He discovered America, and well, how did he interact with the natives? Well, they took care of him, and he took over back, but they don't talk about the murder that he committed. They don't talk about how he slaughtered the natives. So I guess what I'm trying to get us to see is that the concrete history that is written is backed up or is legitimized by the concrete religious stuff that has been written. The legitimacy of Columbus goes beyond Queen Isabella, but it also goes to the Catholic Church. Religion supported that. Religion is the deadliest doctrine on earth. There have been more people killed in the name of religion and greed than anything else. And it's been, even to this day, it's subtle, but Iraq, Afghanistan are being justified by the scriptures. Is that religious right that finds justification in anything that this country does. So we have to rethink everything. And when we begin to do that, we will see that the Creator allows things to go to a place, to continue rather, until we get sick and tired of being sick and tired. And when we get to that place, that's when we begin to seek who we are, which means that there's opportunity to recognize that we have never been separated, but we are always one with it. Therefore, we are capable of dealing with weather, dealing with each other, dealing with attitudes, the whole 9 yards. Because our attitude for prayer, for connection, for oneness, has never been taught. We've been taught to pray as individuals. We've been taught to pray. What do we pray for? My mom is sick. My dad is sick. My friends have cancer. I need a job. I want a car. That's what we've been. Thank you. This morning, I thank you for my life. I thank you for my children. What about everyone else? When a soldier is in combat, I pray that you would bring my son home or my daughter home safely. What about the other people?
That's right.
You see how selfish that is? But when Jesus said to pray, he said, what did he say? Our Father which art in heaven? What is he saying? He says, it says, Abun Dawa Shemaya. He's saying, this is the attitude that you pray with. This is how praying is a state of being. So when you're in this state of being, recognizing that our Father, you cannot truly ask for anything for just you. Because by virtue of your attitude being our, you understand what I'm saying? The first step is to make sure that everyone is included, the whole of mankind, as opposed to your household.
Right.
Every time you turn the camera, I'll be through.
I was just thinking though, I mean, so much of what we've discussed this morning is about, the limitations we place on ourselves, whether it's conscious or not. I mean, starting with, the paradox and kind of accepting the implicit limits that the words give you, right? Any riddle works the same way. It's like, can you find your way around the box that's been hinted at to find the answer? And whether whether the box has been placed there by religion or the limits of how we think about other people, how we're connected, but it's just all these invisible walls, and it's almost like you can't get past them without, like, there's something you have to do in order to even be able to kind of rise above all of that.
The thing that gets you past all boxes you find yourself placed in is the recognition of who and what you are. Because that's the path out of the box.
Mm-hmm.
You, not who you think you are, but who you actually are, and being in pursuit of that reality, and growing in knowledge of that reality.
Well, the things that we've been taught, regardless of what you were taught, we have been taught to be limited. We have been taught to remain limited, to think in limited terms.
Yes.
That's how we've been taught to think. If you say, when I die, I'm going to heaven, now you limited yourself to experiencing what heaven really is. You see?
Mm-hmm.
So we have been taught to function in boxes.
There's so many of them. You can't even
Well,
You're not even aware of them until you bump up
Right.
against the wall. And even then you might not recognize that it happened.
Just desire.
Mhm.
Of course there are multiple boxes, just like multiple ways out.
no, but, I mean, I don't know, I've been sitting here going nuts, because trying to go back to the idea of the paradox, and I think we wandered way off it, but I think
Not far.
it's worth trying to come back, stick with it, and I think you're kind of in that direction, because if this is just what's traditionally in Zen called a koan, a question for which is really no answer.
Well, let me say something really quick about that. That was kind of like a koan. I think traditionally koans, there's no way to approach them intellectually, whereas this thing, we can sort of intellectually describe a way around it. But anyway, keep going.
Well, I mean, okay, I'm a little out of practice, or whatever you want, way out of practice, if I ever was that practiced. But my sense of that is it's a purposefully designed question to force you outside the box.
Yep.
But you have to go through the agony of legitimately trying to work your way through the problem, so to speak.
Yep.
But I think what was running through my head was, you can't let anything, you can't get away with any answer without really challenging it. So you can say, the answer to that paradox is experience, or living the experience. Well, what does that mean? I mean, does that get you outside the box? What does that do? How would you, and I'm both, I find it helpful, but maybe sometimes it's binding to what is in the box. But how would you characterize that reality, that process, that understanding? Could you draw it?
No,
Because you're putting certain limits on things when you draw them.
you,
But you know what I'm trying to say? So how do you know? One of the things that used to intrigue me was when you read examples of how the Zen master sits, the student's there, and he says, well, here's the koan, blah, and the student goes nuts. How does the master know, or the student know, that he's found the real solution, as opposed to just expressed something? You know what I'm trying to say?
It's a
Yeah,
feel.
this is what it
Unless-
means.
Unless that's the ultimate paradox right there. It is the expression. But if you
So,
just,
me ask
because
that
when
real
you read about the answers, for example, somebody was sitting there, okay, here's a process between a master and a student, and the solution was the student got up and ran around the master. That's it. It can be something that
master-
absurd, seemingly absurd. How do you know that's it?
The master is not listening with his intellect to the answer. He is hearing spiritually where the student is resonating from when they are speaking. So, in other words, what experience, or what knowledge, and knowledge is experience, is that student moving with in order to deliver that answer? The master has to know and be in tune with the student to be able to sense what they are experiencing subjectively and what they are drawing from.
Yeah.
Yeah.
um,
And hang on, sorry. And that's what living it means. You have to be able to be quiet and draw from your own experience to connect with your own spirit in order to know the solution to the paradox, quote unquote, the answer to the question, quote unquote, because it does not exist within your intellect's space. And that's why earlier Pastor said desire. You just have to desire the answer, desire to know truth, because what desire is outside of the mental box of intellect. And so it has the ability to resonate like a tuning fork with something else that comes from outside the box, quote unquote.
go ahead.
I think the student too
lose when they find the answer. Because if you're in tune with that desire to seek the answer, it kind of resonates when it comes, so you know. Even if it's not the same for the next guy sitting right beside you. But still, you kind of know when it comes. Even if you can't articulate it.
That's the key.
Yeah, that's why they run around the master.
Right.
Mhm.
Because it doesn't matter what they do.
Tell me what is love? Yeah, you can experience it, but it's very difficult to articulate it.
I would say it's more dangerous to even try, because now
Well-
now you're characterizing it and you've lost it.
Now, guess what? That's the same thing about everything else. Whatever you characterize, you lost it because it may not be the same to Denise.
Well,
As a matter of fact, it's not the same. So what happens is, what we're actually doing right now, trying to intellectualize the spiritual. That is not going to be successful. You cannot write it on paper. That is why this whole, if you were to delve deeply into the whole concept of what we call the Lord's Prayer, you will find that it has nothing to do with verbalization of anything. But it does have to do with experiencing everything. It has to be an individual experience, and it's not your experience if it doesn't resonate with you. And even when it resonates with you, if you make an attempt to verbalize it, your verbalization of it is different than mine because our experiences are different. And the reason our experiences are so different is because we have created different worlds that we live in. So our thoughts, the thoughts that go, we can have the same thought, but that same thought can carry us in different directions. So it's not, you cannot overlay the natural mind with the spiritual. It's not going to happen. Even when you say heaven, all you're saying is that the Father is in this heaven, what we call the sky. Everything else in both worlds at the same time is actually what we're saying. It's in both worlds at the same time. And when we come to the recognition that we're with Him, then we're in both worlds at the same time. And by virtue of us being in both worlds at the same time, we just experience it, we accept it, we have a desire to continue in it, but we cannot put it on paper. We cannot write it. That is one of the reasons a lot of the languages use more symbols than they do letters, because articulation was so difficult as to what they were experiencing.
Well, difficult or more all-inclusive.
Either one.
Just like we say about Aramaic. It was more understanding and appreciative of the individual's ability to interpret.
That's a good example.
We've reached now, what's dominating the world is English, which I was reading the other day is the most flatly spoken of almost the most flat, maybe it is, the most flatly spoken language. Meaning, well, just imagine that, whatever the opposite of that means. I mean, you don't really, I mean, just like the Italians, and they use gestures, but you use even less of your face, less facial muscles, less anything, right? So it doesn't mean it's more efficient in a certain way, it's just flatter. So fuller descriptions that's why it takes you have to write a book to express a thought, which maybe in somebody else's language they could do in a one-page essay. You know what I'm trying to say? It seems like that. I think that sometimes.
Well, there's less trust.
Oh yeah.
There's less trust because you feel like you have to, and that's part of our thinking, our Western thinking, you have to draw the complete box for the person and tell them exactly what's in it. And there's no respect or belief that they can just hear and feel or experience what
Well,
you're
I
saying.
think this is why even in physics, the real breakthroughs came through with mathematics, because they just went way beyond what words could say. And it actually makes me look at French another way.
Well,
which I
when
wanted
you
to.
mention Aramaic, again, I go back to our Father, which is in heaven. That can be translated as our parent, which is the source of everything that is. Our parent, the source of all light and enlightenment. There are so many different ways that can be translated. But when you write it in English, that's it. When you say heaven in English, that's where God lives. I'm serious.
Yeah.
So that's, and so why is that so different? Because the Aramaic allows, the language is so fluid, and then it allows for you to be able to see it through eyes that are different than mine. But in English, we've been taught this is what it is.
Yeah.
Anything different than this is wrong.
It's more impersonal.
Totally.
Well, getting back to the box Denise was talking about, I think, and yeah, you're right, we come up against all sorts of boxes we don't even realize we're in.
That's it.
But I feel like the boxes were designed so that we have a certain reaction,
They were.
or to steer us in a certain direction.
Yes.
But it's up to us to realize we're in the box and not allow the box to shape us. And I think, like what happens to me at school is I don't fit in the box. So people don't really know what to make of me, and that's fine with me.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it can isolate you a little, but
A lot.
but they also leave me alone.
Yes.
Yeah, but that's not
But I'm saying,
fun.
no, it's not fun. But if you see it
You can't be.
and you know what it is,
Well, if you're
it can be
in a wilderness.
just what it is. It doesn't have to be anything that causes a problem. But anyway, yeah, the boxes are designed to steer you in a certain direction, to make you have certain reactions, as opposed to you finding your way out of the box.
It's a catalyst.
Maybe a better
It's-
word
it's-
instead of box is maze.
It's a catalyst. I mean, it's like something has to be put there to push you to where you need to be. And what is it? As the box is nothing but darkness, things that we do not understand. And rather than take things that we do not understand and shape them, just leave it alone if you don't know what it is. Allow it to be what it is, as opposed to making it something that you want it to be. Look at the whole idea of Jesus Christ. It's not Jesus Christ, it's Jesus the Christ. Yeshua, Mashiach, oh my God, Meshach. That's Messiah. So what we have done is taken that and made Christ interchangeable with Jesus. We've taken that and said, you can't be saved unless you accept Christ in your life. There's nowhere in Scripture that says that. So, but what happened, we have taken it and made it be what we want it to be. When I had the confrontation, that's a pretty strong word, but when I was confronted by this guy who told me that I was teaching a dangerous doctrine because I said that God lives in all men. Everyone who's created, the Creator is in them. And he said I was teaching a dangerous doctrine, and the only reason that he said that is because that's what his sect of Baptists believe. They have made it be what they want it to be. And now he comes back to me a few weeks ago and says that I changed his life by virtue of some of the things that I said that he had called wrong. Now, if we are not careful, we can easily, let me put it this way, if we don't get away from trying to explain everything intellectually, we end up becoming elitists. I don't deal with them because we are word church. That attitude, that's an elitist attitude. The idea of being born again has nothing to do with being saved. But yet, everyone accepted that. Why? Because the English-dominated religion said that that's what it is. No one else says that. The English religion also says you have to go through God. You can't get to heaven through Allah. How dumb is that? When Allah, Allah, Elohim, all of them are the same thing. You see what I'm talking about? Making it be what it wants to be. That is the way that the leaders in religious sects stay in power, by making things be what they want it to be, and then casting the blame on God if it goes wrong, or cast the blame on you if you question it. If you look at the scriptures closely, there is no such thing as cooperate, an individual praying for everyone's eyes to be open. It's nothing, it's not there. You do that on your own. The only corporate thing that Jesus did in terms of putting something out there for people is in John 17. The overall prayer that he offered, asking for the glory that the Father had given him to go to those who follow him, etc. If you read that, you see that it has nothing to do with saving my children. It has nothing to do with I'm going to be saved so I can go to heaven. It has nothing to do with that at all. Extremely radical. But that's, how many in this room are comfortable saying that Jesus was not 100% God? How many people who would listen are comfortable with that? Because it's the truth. It's the truth. There was no more God than you have an opportunity to be.
I have a question on Skype.
Okay.
Malika?
Yeah, Mr. Rich, this is Ray. My question was this. I hear you talking about boxes and more or less not limiting ourselves, right? But is it not important to maintain certain boundaries in your life? You know, it's set up as kind of like hedges of protection, because sometimes boundaries are set up to protect us as opposed to limiting us. So I guess for me, I'm trying to understand the difference. You know, when you speak of boxes as opposed to boundaries.
When I speak of boxes, and maybe someone's had a different approach to it, when I speak of boxes, I'm talking about the limitations that we place on ourselves in this material world, as opposed to being open for the spiritual to guide us in this through this journey on this earth. Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these other things will be added. Well, when we begin to seek the things that's going to be added, that's when we put ourselves in the box, and that's when we limit ourselves. But when we seek the kingdom, that is the counsel and the guidance of the Creator and the righteousness, then that's when the material box, the walls to the material box begin to fall away, and our guidance is from the Creator, and the source of our sustenance is the Creator as well, as opposed to us searching for it when He told us, quite frankly, to let it go.
Okay.
Does that help? No, it doesn't. Somebody else.
No, it doesn't. No.
I mean, I think a simple way,
That helps because I mean I guess for me as a scientist, when I think about a box, I think about thinking outside of the box. I'm not a person that's prone to limiting myself to too much of anything. But spiritually, I do recognize the fact that there are certain boundaries that are set and that I perceive are set in my life that are there for a purpose. I'm not saying that I'm not supposed to cross those boundaries at any particular given time, or at the appropriate time, I should say. But I have gathered in my experience that at times when I've crossed certain boundaries when I wasn't supposed to, I got reprimanded for it. And I was just trying to relate that to what you are saying here today, and it makes sense. I mean, it's a little different in my view, but it all still makes sense.
What's an example of your boundary?
I can say something about that too in a second.
Okay, what was your question?
What's an example of a boundary as opposed to a box?
Okay, like for example, I actually attend a men's class at my church, and one of the models that we use in the Bible is Samson, and the life of Samson. One of the examples that my minister used was the fact that sometimes as strong men or as highly educated men, sometimes we actually tend to not adhere to certain boundaries that set in our lives for protection. For example, one boundary that I know I've crossed plenty of times in my life is one of just not being patient. All right, and at times when I've been impatient about things, instead of sitting back, waiting, and letting that time go by until it was an inappropriate time for me to move forward. That's like even on my job. Sometimes I've been so impatient about something to whereas I've acted progressively, and I may have lost out on a position or promotion or whatever because it may not have been my appropriate time to move forward at that particular point. So I guess I know for me, patience is something that I have been that God has worked on me about over the last few years, and I struggle with. I have to be honest with you. But that's an example of a boundary for me. Not saying that not being patient or being impatient is right or wrong. It's just that I recognize that in my life, when I'm not patient about something, it sometimes has an adverse effect on me.
I want to ask you a question. Do you want patience? Ray?
Do I want patience?
Yes. It's Ray. It's R-A-Y. Do you want patience?
Patience is a double-edged sword.
I beg your pardon?
You know, yeah, I mean, do
I mean
I,
patience, period. Do you want patience in your life?
Yes or no?
He knows it's a trick question. You
No,
know
it's
my
not.
answer.
But do you want patience in your life?
okay, you know what? Yes, I do.
Okay, the only way you get patience in your life is by being put in situations where you have to experience impatience and forcing yourself to be patient. That's the only way you get it. Traffic jam, I'm here for a reason. Pass over for a promotion, it's not time yet. Why? Because your sustenance is not in your paycheck. Your sustenance comes from the Creator. As far as the Samson thing is concerned, there's a huge misunderstanding about Samson in the scriptures. Shishon is Samson in the Hebrew, and it means to shine as the sun or a brilliant light. So what Samson did, what Shishon did, instead of him living, remaining who he knew he was created to be, he chose to go in another direction and look to the earthly things for his sustenance, not just necessarily food, but in a lustful way, because the opposite of lust is not love. The opposite of lust is restraint. So he sought, instead of operating the way he function the way he was created to function, he chose to do it in a different manner, and as a result of that, he ended up going astray. Now, why did that happen? It happened in order for him to recognize his shortcoming. And when he did that, things changed in his life because he desired them to change. Nothing changes in anyone's life without that desire. Samson is no different than any of us in terms of being created as a ray of light or the brightness of the sun. All of us have been created that way. And Samson is no different than us than we are when we don't offer restraint or we will not restrain. When I said lust, 99% of the time what goes through your mind is love or sex. You can lust after money, you can lust after promotion, you can lust after anything. But the point is to restrain yourself. When you're seeking truth, if you enter a lustful desire for truth, then you will get to a place where you think that you've arrived and you begin to look down your nose at everyone else. But if you restrain yourself with things that you don't understand, you don't make them up, you allow it to flow to you. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's very important to understand that everything in the scriptures is there for a reason, and every word has a meaning. And every meaning of the word will carry you back to the spiritual essence of that name.
I don't know that we answered the question though.
Actually, no, you did. For me, I mean, I don't.
You talking about patience?
Boundaries versus boxes.
Oh, I thought I did, because boundaries, if it's material, a boundary and a box are the same thing. It's just another way of saying it. If we're spiritual, if we're seeking the kingdom, then there are no boundaries, there are no boxes, because the Creator is limitless. And that's what we're seeking. It doesn't mean you don't do you do anything you want to, because that's what we call boundaries. We got to say about the things that we do or don't do. That's not what I'm talking about at all. And I don't think any one of us is making reference to that. If the Creator, matter of fact, my restraint became stronger when I began to understand that there are no limitations because of my seeking the Creator. My personal restraint became much stronger. My affinity to be one with the Creator became much stronger because I don't have to concern myself with whether a bill is going to be paid, whether I'm going to be in a traffic accident, or something bad going to happen to my kids. I don't have to deal with those things because as long as I seek the kingdom, the righteousness, as long as I'm on that journey, then all these other things will be added. And if something happened that people consider being the disaster, then I be still and try to understand why. Because it all has a purpose. Does that help?
Yes, for me. It does.
Okay.
But can, I'm just trying to think what the Buddha said when he came back from the wilderness. He said basically live in moderation, which is maybe a form of, what I was just trying to think out from what you said was, as you give in to that understanding, for want of a better way to say it, don't you naturally sense that it brings with it a sense to be restrained, to be more loving, to be more patient, to be more, you know what I'm saying? It's sort of like to those who are given, more is expected. You get a sense that the bar is raised, for one of a rather clumsy way to say it. So you are more respectful of that. You don't just go, Yahoo, I just found the truth and now I'm gonna go out and just squander, you know what I'm trying to say?
Well, what you just said.
So you wind up with the real teacher is the little guy in a little dark room in the small little hut and way in the back off the main road.
See,
He's very modest.
You have described what Jesus was teaching his disciples. Just be quiet and find peace within. Because if you don't have peace within, you will not have peace with anyone else. Live in moderation. To me, it simply means that I don't go beyond what the Creator brings to me. My desire is not for a bigger car, a bigger house. That's not my desire. My desire is to understand who I am, and by virtue of that, then I have opportunity to talk about that and helping other people find out who they are. That's what he was teaching them. That the idea of prayer was different when Jesus taught that, and people would understand that Jesus didn't have a bank account, and Jesus was not a Christian. Jesus did not have theologians. He was not a theologian. As a matter of fact, he was quite the contrary. And what he was doing was extremely radical based upon the times in which he lived. And now, to do the same thing is also radical, because I challenge the whole concept of which post-Constantine Christianity is based. I challenge all of that, because when I look at the scriptures, I don't find those principles in the scriptures. This week, I'm going to have to meet with someone who called, and they want their daughter was being counseled by two people who were given to them by DSS, and these counselors are telling the child that and the mother that they got a spirit of pornography, a spirit of evil, a spirit of over their house. I got to deal with that this week. Now, where did that come from? What did it? It didn't come from the scriptures. But people feel comfortable doing that because they are in an environment that is accepting of that, as opposed to someone challenging it, saying, show me the scripture to support what you are saying. We don't get that anymore. And when you say, show me the scripture to support that, all of a sudden, you challenging God. No, hell, I'm not. You're not God.
How is it appropriate, though?
I have no idea yet. But I got to feel
That was my first thought. I'm like, never mind, challenge. I'm like, how the government and I don't understand.
When I finish with it, it's going to be ugly for somebody.
I hope so.
Oh, yeah. Because I almost said, no, I'm not going to do it. But then when I thought about the ramifications of it, not just this particular child, but I'm also thinking about other children. You see? So it may very well be that this was brought to me in order for me to change it for everyone else. And that's how we have to perceive everything that we do. That is not just for us. It's for everyone else. It's for humanity as a whole. So the life that you live in moderation is governed by the Creator anyway. So if indeed your journey is to seek the Creator, the truth, the light, the understandings, if that's the desire, so then that's the journey you travel. I think Nick had something about boxes.
Nick's gone.
Nick's yours.
He's got a problem with his computer.
Oh, okay.
Just shut off on
But
me.
the other thing I was thinking in lieu of what was said on the phone is, the analogy to me is, and a lot of things, you can interchange the words, I think. So when you're talking about impatience, and I don't mean this, well, impatience and immaturity. But I'm not talking about, we accuse the person, and it's really the situation, and you're part of the situation. So and we say it here, when the time is right, right? And we use other analogies for what non-ripeness is. But I think that's the same thing about the energy to not be patient. There's an immaturity, a lack of readiness, by definition. So the question is, if you know that in yourself, see that in yourself, yes, you have to create a certain discipline of restraint, and then have the experience of what that gives you to build a certain momentum around that and see the positiveness that comes out of it.
Right.
And most probably too, your intent would be more honest, so to speak, right? Because I know I've been in situations where I've said things or whatever that were bringing attention to me as opposed to revealing a certain truth. And you gotta know the difference.
And we realize that.
So that's the impatience versus the patience. That's when you talk to another person why you're not demeaning them by whatever you say. They're telling you they got a problem and you say, well, what's wrong with you? Why can't you do blah, blah, blah? That sort of thing. Whose purpose are you serving by talking that way?
What you're describing is this. We say that, we know this, but we don't recognize it. I'm going through something. You didn't say I'm in something. You said I'm going through something. But as long as you complain about it, as long as you fear it, you will be stymied. You will stop. Your going through slows down. You will get through it, but it takes longer because every step of the way you are resisting everything that allows you or gives you the ability to get through it, whatever the it is. Whether it be impatience, whether it be fear of losing something, because anything that you are afraid of losing, you've already lost it anyway. Whether it is a fear of a job, it doesn't matter. Whatever circumstance that you deal with, and say, I'm going through something at this moment, then accept it as going through and stop complaining. Because keep in mind, those who complain in their wilderness, in the wilderness, in the desert in Israel, when they were going through the desert, what did they do? Those who complained in their wilderness was going through something, and all of them died in the wilderness. So when you look at Joshua and the other dude, the two who got through it, they were the two who did not complain. So teaching yourself not to complain and recognizing it as a challenge as opposed to an obstacle, you fare much better. I mean, when we look at things as an obstacle, then we are afraid to move forward. Even though we go forward physically, we're not going forward emotionally. We're not going forward spiritually. Our bodies are moving, our lips are moving because we are saying something, all the stuff that sounds right, but we are not taking time to be still and breathe. And that's one of the reasons, if you pronounce those words that relates to prayer, that relates to a deity, all those words require a deep breath in pronunciation. Because we're inhaling the essence of the Creator, and we're exhaling life for the plants and stuff on this earth. So if you use words when you pray, you have a tendency to have to fight off thoughts. When you're trying to pray, I never heard anyone say any different. Every time I get on my knees to pray, it's like everything, all these thoughts start coming to me. And I have to ward them off before I can think. What about just focusing on your breathing? I guarantee you, if you focus on your breath, in just a few seconds, that's all you will hear, your breath. Same thing with a boom. If you do that, that's what Jesus was telling them. Cast aside all this other stuff. This is not a prayer to be verbalized. This is an attitude to be utilized. It's a thing to walk in. It's a way of being, as opposed to a verbalization of some words that were written in their language. Any question? Oh, I know it. One other thing. When it says that thy kingdom come, the word kingdom, we talked about Makuta, we talked about that. The principles, the counsel, the advice, etc. When it says thy kingdom come, we're talking about it. The word come is a word that speaks to intimacy. It speaks to, actually, it talks about it's called chupa, the marital hut. Yeah, chupa, the marital hut for that the Jews recognize. That's what this word indicates, the masculine and the feminine coming together in an intimate way. So what it's actually saying is you want the kingdom to be, you want to be intimate with the kingdom, so that the birth of direction, insight, wisdom, whatever can take place. You understand what I'm trying to say? But and you become the place for that to transpire. If we were to go through all of the words in that, you will begin to see that every single word is dealing with what's in us. What's in us. If you don't be still, you can't hear. And if you can't hear, you have nothing to say. And I think I maybe keep referring to the prayer thing because what I'm doing, I'm in the process of writing about prayer. Not so much just to send to the teacher, but to be open, because I believe that if we understand those principles, the more people understand those principles, the easier it will be for people to be transformed, because prayer is a transformative agent, for lack of a better term. It does transform you. It doesn't transform Betty, unless Betty wants it to transform Betty. Got it? If Jesus' prayers did not transform the disciples to the point where they were afraid to leave the upper room, then what makes us think that we are going to transform someone else? And the reason it doesn't happen is because of the idea of what? Free will. If you don't, the Creator is not going to beat you over your head. Here it is, you can accept it or you can reject it. That's how we have to deal with it. And we always know what the right direction is, but we always lean, seemingly, or more than not, we lean to the direction of the material. Oh my God, here we go again type stuff, as opposed to, hey, this is dumb.
It just occurs to me while you were talking is, here is the ultimate box.
Yes.
Our bodies. And we can be trapped inside of this box. We can be put into other boxes that fit us just right, and we allow ourselves to fit in. And that's where we will be unless we decide to seek the truth of who we are, and pursue that. And that is our way out of the box.
The moment that you have that desire, you actually begin to tear down the wall. What came to mind, Audrey, when you were speaking was this. The idea, the word for prayer, shalu, comes from shalom, which is an Aramaic word for to hunt, or to capture, or to lie in wait, or to set a trap. Shalu talks about setting a trap for God, capturing the wisdom, the understanding, and the peace of the Creator. That's what it talks about. That's what prayer is. So when you open yourself up through your breathing or desire, then what you're seeking to do is to capture the essence, the wisdom, the understanding of the Creator. And if you think about it in those terms, what does a hunter do? A hunter has to lay in wait. A hunter has to be patient. A hunter has to be still until the prey shows itself. If it's a trap, the hunter has to be careful that the trap is set the way it's supposed to be set. If you take that and make application to us as the humans, then it's talking about being open to capture the essence of the Creator. And that's free will. If you don't do that, it's not going to happen. You know, standing in front of a congregation praying does not open you up. Uttering words don't open you up. Why? Because when we utter words in prayer, be it standing in front of a congregation or at home, we have to think about what we're going to say. And when we begin thinking about what we're going to say, we begin to build those walls again. But when you breathe and you allow the Creator, see, 99% of all the revelation that I ever get does not come to me when I am quiet and what I call praying in terms of being quiet and being still. It doesn't come to me. When I'm moving about doing other stuff, that's when it comes. And what I understand is that it was revealed before, but the manifestation of it came later. If you're not still, it does not happen. If you're not intimate, it does not happen. So I said to someone about capturing, and they got the connotation that you're going to run the guard down. No, it's allowing that when that flow is there, your desire is to hold on to it. That's what he's talking about. Ultimate box. That's the reason there is not a word in the Hebrew or the Aramaic for living body. Because the body doesn't live, you do. You are responsible for this body to function. If the body lived, then why is it that when a baby is born, if that baby is not stimulated to breathe, that baby is dead? At the point of birth, it's between life and death. And what causes it to live? Breath. The essence of the Creator. That's what causes it to live. Think about it this way. When that child begins to grow up, that child begins to see imaginary stuff that we don't see right. So does that come when the child inhales, breathes? Does that realization, that reality, is that what brings it to that place? And we take it out of them and give them an earthly vision of life? I never shall forget when Clark told me that when she said she was a little girl, she always thought that you were awake when we call asleep, and you're actually asleep when you're walking around awake. And I asked her, how long? She, yeah, if I remember correctly, she told me she was about 4 or 5 years old when she saw that. So how is it that we get to this place where we lose that? Because we are taught to lose it. We're taught to tell God your problem. Jesus says you don't need to do that. Read the 6th chapter of Matthew. He said you don't need to do that. He already knows what you need. That's what it said. Now either we're going to believe it or we're not. And if he already knows what your needs are, takes you back to seek ye first the kingdom. Takes you back to the first verse in the 23rd Psalm. Because Yahweh is my shepherd, I have no lack. Takes you right back there. And again, it's easy. What makes it difficult is to cast it off. Because what we learned is so deeply ingrained that makes it difficult to cast off. Now that's the question. I'm done. We done. Questions, comments? Okay, Audrey.